Hello and welcome to a special solo edition of Let's Talk Broncos. Everyone's away and whatnot on weddings. We all have a busy weekend this week. And so rather than leaving you all hanging for a second straight week, especially with Broncos OTAs starting up this week, I figured it would be better to just roll solo and give you guys some of the latest news, notes, and takeaways from this return to Broncos practice here with OTAs starting up. One of the big takeaways, Sean Payton talked about Troy Franklin and how he could maybe have a big breakout campaign in 2025. Highlighted Marvin Mims and the breakout he had in 2024, another second-year receiver partway through the season, experiencing a big leap, and said, why couldn't Troy Franklin experience something similar? And I do think there are some fairly clear reasons, right? Mims took his big leap in year two because it took the coaching staff a while to figure out how to use him, or how to, and how to expand that kind of gadget role into a major part of the offense and not just a little bit piece. That's not really the thing with Troy Franklin, right? It's not like they were misutilizing him. They were using him as a vertical downfield target. And, that's what he should be doing as a speed threat, stretch the defense. That's exactly what they did with him last season. And he was successful at it. You look at, deep separation metrics. He was better at getting open downfield than just about anyone in the league last year. The problem was he wasn't completing the plays. And, that could certainly get better in year two as the game slows down for him some, gets maybe a little more comfortable, a little more confidence in just the offense, what's going on around him, speed of the game. But if that leap does happen, it'll be for a very different reason than Mims's leap happened. And so I do think that's important to remember. He has to figure some stuff out himself as a player before he can be fully realized. Also, Mims had that avenue to success, being a vertical downfield target, but he had other abilities too because of his prowess as a ball carrier. Franklin's going to have to figure this stuff out because this is how he's going to have to win in the NFL. He's such a light body. He's never going to be that proficient after the catch, in spite of how fast he is. You're going to need him to have a much higher hit rate on those catch opportunities because as, one of those vertical field stretchers, you don't get a lot of targets, right? That's a low volume, high explosiveness role. He's going to have to, you can't be dropping 20% of those opportunities, let alone 50% or whatever it was last year. Every single one of those, because those opportunities are so rare and so hard to open up. Anytime you actually do open them up, you have to take advantage of them. Then again, we've seen players make this leap in the past, but something to watch for. Nix's year two leap, I think, is much easier to feel confident in. He talked about how easier it is this summer for him to just spit out play calls and translate the offense to the players around him, which I think it's easy to overlook those things. But, in college with the sandwich boards and their whole funky play calling style, he wasn't having to call out plays to a huddle or at the line of scrimmage or, really make any of those adjustments. It was all done by different siloed coaching staffs on the sidelines for a lot of it. That was a big learning curve for him last season, and he expressed as much. The fact that he's not going to have to juggle that this year, this is kind of what he was getting into, is going to make it a lot easier he's going to be able to focus all his mental energy on what is the defense throwing at me and how do I diagnose this, rather than trying to figure out, okay, this play means what and who's doing what and who's going to be where and what are the different options, what are the different audibles, hot routes and whatnot. He's not going to have to think about different protections. That's all now, he's not having to think through that translation. He's fluent in that language now, and he can just focus on the problem at hand and how to diagnose that. Peyton highlighted the same thing with him and noticing a similar leap in his game. And I think Bo Nix is primed for a huge 2025, not only because of that, but he's demonstrated a great aptitude for growth, something we've talked a lot about on this show, how much he's developed through each stage of his career, from the start of his college career to the end of his college career, from the start of training camp to the end of training camp, start of preseason, end of preseason, start of regular season, end of regular season. Consistent growth and meaningful growth every single time. I think this first full offseason in the same NFL system, we're going to see a meaningful leap from him yet again. Especially because, he had that consistent growth in spite of the fact every single year he was working with a new offense and a new offensive coordinator. The last time he had carryover in an offensive system was his last year of high school. So every single summer he's been having to work from the ground up, having to learn that new language every single summer, having to build a new rapport with a new coach every single, a new staff of coaches even every single summer. Finally, rather than having to re-pour or relay a foundation, he's getting to build on top of the already existing one. And again, given the amount of growth he's already demonstrated in those adverse situations, it has me very excited for what he could accomplish in a bit more of a favorable situation. Hopefully helping to propel that leap is going to be Evan Ingram and RJ Harvey, also Pat Bryant, really the three big additions to that Broncos offense. Broncos this year really didn't lose anybody. I think they might have the highest percentage of starters returning from the 2024 season this year. So there's very little turnover. And on offense, that's especially true. Really, Javonte Williams is that element of turnover. Even some spots where you might see a different starter than you saw last year, like tight end, where you figure Evan Ingram takes over for Adam Troutman. It's not because Troutman is gone, it's because they upgraded on that position. So, that's positive. On the other hand, I think a lot of Broncos country wishes they did a little bit more, probably both at tight end and at running back, at least raise that floor a little bit. I think Estime and Harvey have the potential to be a really exciting, dynamic backfield that complements each other really, really well. But they also have the potential to be just as bad as last year's backfield was, or not a meaningful enough improvement to support Bo Nix in the way that is necessary. I think how upgraded that supporting cast is going into the season is going to be a really interesting thing to watch for over the rest of this summer, into training camp, into the preseason and everything. Because last year, Sutton had a great year. Mims came on strong during the second half of the year, but there are some real questions with the weapons surrounding Nix. You already talked about running back, but who's the Z in this offense, right? The X with Courtland Sutton's pretty straightforward. I think you even have guys who, you could line up there in a pinch, right? Like Evan Ingram has done a little bit of that in his career. Pat Bryant, of course, makes sense there. Devon Villay makes some sense there. They've got options. They really don't have anyone for the Z outside Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims. And as we discussed, both those guys are going to have to develop. Franklin's is really obvious. Marvin Mims blew up down the stretch last year, looked really great. That coincided with them moving him from the boundary to doing more work in the slot. So if he's doing his best work out of the slot, Evan Ingram probably is going to be doing his best work out of the slot. Sean Payton loves those power slots. So Devon Villay, Pat Bryant, they're going to be getting a lot of work out of the slot. Okay, so you've got like 4 options there you feel good about, and you've got like half an option you feel good about at Z. That's a little concerning to me. Now, it's a problem that existed last year too, but I don't think that means it's not concerning. So, how is it better enough? Is it improved enough? Or with, another year of tape on this offense, what Bo Nix likes to do, is it going to be too easy for opposing defenses to handicap them? That's something I'm curious to watch. A little related, this is a small little tidbit I'll touch on quick. Sam Ehlinger is taking the number 4 jersey for the Denver Broncos. That means there are no single-digit numbers left for either Barron or Jade, that is, or RJ Harvey. RJ Harvey, of course, had the interview with Sean Payton's daughter, who works for, I think, like FanDuel, some media conglomerate, where he talked about, hey, I'd love a single-digit uniform number. For that to happen, there's going to have to be some cuts. There's going to have to be some reshuffling of the roster. And outside Ehlinger, there's not many obvious angles for the Broncos to take there. And even if they cut Ehlinger, he probably sticks around on the practice squad, might be able to hold on to that number 4 jersey. So although Harvey might not hold on to the 37, so I wouldn't order the jersey yet, it looks unlikely that it's going to be a single-digit option for whatever that's worth. I think we're going to hit on some contract news here. We've got 3 little contract situations. Or no, sorry, another breakout player I want to talk about here. Drew Sanders. Drew Sanders has had a pretty rough first 2 years in the league, struggled to get on the field as a rookie, and then injury really hung that process up last season. Saw some play down the stretch and even made a few impact plays, had the sack against, goodness, who was that? Was that the Bengals? I'm blanking right now. But had a sack last year. Was it the Browns? Doesn't matter. Had some moments even on defense, was a really solid special teamer last year down the stretch. Sean Payton said, and I think this is a great omen for Drew Sanders and his future in the NFL and with the Denver Broncos, said that the Broncos have a clear vision for Drew Sanders at linebacker. And it sounds like, listening to my coworker Benjamin Albright's reporting on Broncos Country Tonight and KOA Sports and whatnot, that role, and it also just makes sense knowing the player that Drew Sanders is, that role is going to be kind of as a, designated pass rusher from the inside linebacker position. Kind of like what we've seen maybe Zach Bond do at times, that linebacker that's moving forward a lot of the time. But obviously he's going to be in a much, much smaller role. It'll be a rotational role as opposed to Bond. And I think that's a good way to start trying to get Sanders on the field and figure out what you've got, hopefully get him to progress in his development some, gain some familiarity with the position, because you don't want him just, he's played one full season in his entire life. He's played one full season of off-ball linebacker, so you don't want to, even then it was at Arkansas where he was being used very heavily as a pass rusher, similar to this role he'd be put in now. He wasn't sitting back a lot and having to diagnose route concepts or read and react to different plays. That's not going to be his strong suit. Now he does have pass rushing chops. You just can't put him on the edge because he doesn't have the measurables for it. Moving him inside, he might be able to, put those pass rushing instincts to work and, cause a little havoc. Dre Greenlaw is probably a better blitzer, but I'd take Sanders over Alex Singleton in that regard. And again, hopefully you get his feet wet here and, he gains a little bit of comfortability and You're able to expand that defensive role, and maybe even, going into 2026, he's the starter opposite Dre Greenlaw. I imagine that's the ultimate vision. Nonetheless, just great that they have, I don't know, finally landed on a long-term position for him, or I guess more so that they're sticking to it, because they've said he's a linebacker for a while, but that they're sticking to it. They're remaining consistent. They're not jerking him around anymore. Hopefully that pays dividends on the field. All right, now we'll get into contract news. ESPN's Jeff Legwold on the Denver Broncos beat here projected an average annual value of $24.5 million as Nick Benito's likely floor, using Montez Sweat as a comparable there. Now, I think a lot of Broncos country is prickling at that number, and I understand why. It is pricey. It is, a little uncomfortable. My thing is, the cap is going to go up, over $100 million over the next 3 years. It's not going to be that hard to fit these deals in. It's not going to be that hard to manage the dead cap of it all. Again, it's expanding exponentially to where the inflation is so ridiculous that, okay, there's a risk of $15 million of dead cap down the line, but that's nothing. And I think an important thing, and I've tried to bang this drum some on the show recently, but I think something that gets overlooked too much, but it's important, is the fact that there's risk on both sides of this. And if anything, the risk we're seeing, the side of the equation we're seeing go bust more frequently, is betting against the player. That's how the Cowboys are paying, or stuck paying what they're paying for Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, and soon after that, Micah Parsons. And you make enough of those decisions and they compound. They could have had CeeDee Lamb for 10 plus million less than he's going to be on. They could have had Micah Parsons for 5 10 million less than he's going to be on. Could have had Dak Prescott for 5-10 million less than he's going to be on. And very quickly you get to the point of $15 to $30 million you're wasting on an annual basis. That's 2 quality starters, maybe even 3-4 guys if you're closer to the 30 million end of that spectrum. If you would have been able to negotiate them down even further. Imagine that Cowboys team with 3-4 quality starters on the roster, at a few of those positions of need, and how much more daunting that squad looks than the one they have right now. There's some very obvious roster holes on that team. Burning all that money is part of the reason why. And I guess, as I'm talking, I'm realizing they haven't burned the Micah Parsons money yet, but that's coming. So maybe you wait and see on Nick Benito. And as a result, you're protecting yourself against some bust possibility. But if he has a great year, okay, maybe now you're stuck paying him $40 million. So that's $15 million a year you're potentially spending that you didn't have to. And it's not going to be a situation, in a sense, it's almost better to have a contract go bust from just a purely financial perspective, because, okay, we gave Benito $25 million a year. He's playing like a $5 to $10 million a year player, which, about the same level of wasted value between that 40 and that 10 million number. Where do you go from there, right? You're going to cut him. That's going to free up all that money going forward. And it'll be, a little painful. You'll take some dead cap on in the short term. It'll be nothing like the Russell Wilson deal. But as we just saw with the Russell Wilson situation, and it's not an outlier. We saw it with Goff. We saw it with Wentz. We saw it with no, not really. I guess a little with the Colts. I'm trying to think of who else had the big dead cap hits, but it's been replicated a good number of times now, where you can deal with that amount of dead cap. It's on your books for a year, two at most, and then you're done with it. If it goes the other way, Nick Bonito has a great 2025. You pay him the $40 million a year. That's not going to be something you want to move off of, right? You're because we're living in the world where the contract's not a bust, right? That angle of risk. If it's not a bust, you're happy to be paying him $40 million a year. You're happy to have that edge, but because you're not going to be interested in moving off that contract, it's not, $15 million you're wasting, each of the next 2 years. It's $15 million you've wasted over each of the next 5 years, right? Until there's another opportunity to renegotiate. And with him being paid at the top of the market, that window is going to probably open for the team sooner than it will the player. So I don't know. I just think, and also consider the player we're talking about here. It's not just Jerry Jeudy, coming off a great season because he tore up Levi Wallace one week. Nick Bonito has gotten dramatically better every single year he's been in the league. Even if he just gets a little better next year, or even if he remains constant, what he was last year, that contract is going to jump to at least, $35 million, no lower than the low 30s. It's going to go, right now they're projecting 24.5. I'd say as a floor, 32.5. Right. So that's a 33% jump in value. That's a third. That's a ton of dough. Why make that gamble? I think against this player who, and there's the Twitter headaches and everything, but just generally speaking, has really demonstrated that he's on the right track. And, there's little reason to bet against the idea that even if you think the production numbers are going to come back down to earth and everything, odds are he keeps building on what he did last year and, or at least, continuing to be a very productive pass rusher. And that's going to go for $30+ million nowadays. If you can lock him up for, around 25, I think you should do that right now. Another defensive contract here. John Franklin Myers. This is a little tidbit. He hasn't been at the first week of OTAs. Now, as Mike Kliss has reported via, the agent has said through Mike Kliss, I guess is maybe the better way to put that. Franklin Myers has missed OTAs each of the past several seasons. This is nothing new for him. It's how he conducts his off-season training, and he will be there for mandatory camp. So nothing there. I do wonder if, although things seem amicable right now, does it start to get messy if, John Franklin Myers is wanting that deal and the Broncos aren't looking to budge on it? Does he start holding out of training camp or whatnot? Or is he happy to just play out this last year, hit the open market and get a payday that way? I would that would surprise me, but right now it seems to maybe be on that trajectory. So that's interesting with the, agent going out of his way to say he'll be back for the mandatory stuff. Maybe it'll be a hold in or something, but we'll see. Finally here, last bit of news before I get out. Courtland Sutton was at OTAs. And I think that's especially interesting considering the John Franklin Myers situation. These are two guys in contract years. Zach Allen and Nick Bonito are the other ones, but they're 2 years out. JFM and Sutton are in contract seasons. And while JFM's not there, Sutton is, which also very notable because Sutton wasn't there last year when he had 2 years left on his deal. So that just it's interesting to me. I wonder if things are in a much better place now than they were last year. I kind of think they must be, and that's why Sutton is there. That has me optimistic the Broncos could figure out something with him in these next couple of days, and hopefully you're not rocking the boat with your young quarterback's development and you're keeping his favorite target around for this second year. Once Bo Nix is a little more solidified, I think then you can tinker with the supporting cast. The Chiefs weren't getting rid of Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce in year 2 of that operation. What was that, 2021, 2022? So year 4 or 5, you want to like start stripping away like some foundational pieces, some like security blankets from the quarterback. I think that's fair. You should trust your veteran quarterback to pick up the slack. Then once you're paying him those big numbers, Broncos aren't at that point yet. Once again, the cap is exploding so rapidly. It's much harder to find the talented players than to find the cap space. That's even more true when you have the richest ownership in the league like the Broncos do. And that's even more true when that ownership has demonstrated they're willing to spend money for even minute competitive edges like, refreshing the practice field or the playing field at the stadium halfway through each of the seasons they've been the owners of the team. So, again, all that in mind, lock up Sutton, make him happy, don't overcomplicate it. Should he be the number one forever? No. I understand that might be some of the prickling with Sutton, that he's not like the super elite weapon. And that's true. You can pay him a good rate and he can be the number 2. Could draft a guy in the first round next year. Just like that's not a problem to me. I don't worry about pay the guy, keep him around, don't fall victim to, whatever that money ascribes to him. Anyways, that will do it for me here. I hope you guys enjoyed the solo show. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments if you have a chance to do so. I think we want to do more of these throughout the summer, just as schedules might be tough here or there. We don't want to leave you guys without a show, but we might have to go solo sometimes, whether it's me, whether it's Joey, whether it's Bree. So if this just, hey, we'd rather not even have a show than this garbage, let us know that. We'll take that into account. If you enjoy the solo show, leave a comment letting us know, and we'll make sure to keep these in the rotation for you guys and keep them coming throughout the summer. We'll be back on Sunday, at least, for the next edition of this show. Altitude adjustment. Mario, as you've seen, kind of in the summer, is just doing interview series, and it's going to kind of be reliant on when he gets those interviews lined up. So I'm not sure if we have one on Tuesday, but we might. Stay tuned for that. Maybe an altitude adjustment this Tuesday at 8. But if not that, see you next Sunday.